Who are you disrupting?
Well, we're actually disrupting a lot of the existing notions of the industry. For example, that low-cost housing is low-value housing.
Yeah.
And so what we've done is we've integrated a lot of high-value amenities in our projects. Like we're the developer that's also known for its wakeboard parks. We've got wakeboarding in our mass housing subdivisions. We've got swimming pools, clubhouses, tons of basketball courts. We've opened up a new project in General Santos City. We'll be putting up a boxing gym.
Right.
And so it's not really just about providing housing, it is providing a kind of a level of life and lifestyle which makes our buyers and the citizens and the people around the cities where we, after they have projects, become more uplifting.
Okay, that's a great introduction. Dada, you work mainly as an ambassador, right? Can you tell us some of your experience and
yeah, well, experiences-wise, I went to UC started in Silicon Valley and then started my companies. And so I have not, technically speaking, disrupted in the last 15 years, ever since I became a venture capitalist. But I invest in companies that have disrupted some major...
second-hand disruptor.
Yeah, exactly. Some major industries, for example, the first GPS chip that is in a lot of our cell phones here. That came from one of those companies that I funded. A lot of other systems that you guys buy, personal computers. Now, I did the disruption there years ago by redesigning that whole thing. But you know, disruption is just a result of innovation.
Yeah.
In other words, you start with innovation.
All right, well, let's look at the word itself, disruption. I mean, is it just a fancy word for innovation? Is it just a catchy word? Or what do we mean by it?
Well, it is the effect.
It's the effect.
Yeah, it's the effect. The
effect
innovation
of
is really the
innovation.
cost of
Yeah.
the beginning of all things is that you innovate. Things that have not been done before.
Right.
And then, you know, when you start that, you may not even know that you can do it. But the effect is that things that have not been done before, it truly disrupts majorly.
Okay, we're going to get on to why that might be good or why that might be bad. Kieran, please.
So I'll just quickly describe what APAC IG is. APAC IG is a joint venture between Rocket Internet and Purito to establish internet companies in Southeast Asia and broadly Asia Pacific. We have a portfolio of 13 companies across 15 countries in Philippines. Some of our companies are household names. WD, Carbon, you must have heard of. But also sister companies like Zelda, Lazada, Foodpanda. So by nature, very disruptive. All these companies, whether it's offline retail, getting online, whether it is searching for a house, doing it online, whether it's selling a house online, whether it's selling a car online. So we see internet as a channel which is very naturally disruptive because people can then deliver old services using this new channel, and all of the companies are geared just to do that.
So how does Foodpanda work, for example?
So Foodpanda is a very simple concept. It's everyone used to order food on the phone. For delivery, they used to call up the restaurant or call up the company, place their order, dictate all the menu items, what they wanted, tell their address, tell their name, tell their phone number. This is so much friction. We put the entire process online, so you can just go online. Menu is there, just a few clicks, your address is stored, everything is stored. And then you check out and then you get your food delivered and there's no friction. So if I have a country like Indonesia where English is not as popular and I want to order food, doing it on the phone is almost impossible. And so very simple concept, something which is happening offline, people are doing it on the phone. We just bring the entire concept online and it just catches on like wildfire because the people see that it's a better way to do something which is already being done.
Right. And this is done all across, Foodpanda would exist all across Asia?
Yeah, so Foodpanda is in Philippines, but it's also in 40 other countries in the world. So right from someone in Bangladesh or even someone in Ghana or someone in Argentina, anyone can order Foodpanda. It's the same app, it's the same website, and it's the same experience.
Okay, fantastic. I'm just going to skip to the end here, and Nick, can you tell us a little bit about your business? I think maybe we need this?
Well, Surpass is a e-commerce for digital goods. We're listed in the Philippine Stock Exchange. I think that alone, I found out later on after we had listed, apparently there's no consumer tech company that's listed in many of the markets in Southeast Asia.
Right.
There's none in Singapore, there's none in Indonesia, there's none in Thailand, Vietnam, and so on. The disruption really comes for us is where we target the base of the pyramid emerging market customer for digital goods. So these are casual games, stickers, things people purchase in consumer phones. So when you have that lens where you target the base of the pyramid customer, the way we package your services from pricing, we must make sure that they have enough money in their wallet to pay for it. Payment, instead of using credit card, people use prepaid loan to pay for these goods and services. Discovery, we work with telco partners to distribute these goods. Even the size of the content, the speed by which let's say it's a multiplayer experience for games, the speed by which the content is delivered. Putting together all of those ingredients to create a great experience for customers who don't typically get access to this.
Right, and is that disruption? I mean, are you putting anybody else out of business by what you're doing? Are you challenging other businesses?
Well, for a lot of traditional, for example, game development studios or digital content creators, they will tend to target credit card wielding app store using type of smartphone customers. Whereas we're able to create a new market by targeting customers who don't typically have the capability to enjoy this type of experience.
So how do you get paid?
So we work with telecom companies who have a billing relationship with their customers using prepaid loans. So you don't have a credit card, that's fine, you can use prepaid loans as a form of currency.
All right, Professor Villegas, let's step back a bit and look at the theory. So disruption sounds kind of scary. Why would we possibly want all these people disrupting our lives?
Well, first of all, what can we disrupt at the macroeconomic level? The question is the 6 to 7% growth that we have been enjoying over the last 3 years. Can there be something that can disrupt the 6 to 7% so that it slow down? My answer is only an earthquake like that in Nepal or several Yolandas can remove the 6 to 7% growth. Even an earthquake in Malacanang will not change 6 to 7%. Because we have reached a critical mass of reforms following the paradigm of Dr. Robinson. Political reforms under Cory, market reforms under Fidel Ramos, and believe it or not, countryside infrastructure reform in 2 years of era, which was continued in a big way by President Macapagal Arroyo in the Nautical Highway, and the capping stone, governance reform. To put them all together, we have reached a critical mass that 6 to 7% growth is sustainable indefinitely into the future. So I don't see any disruptor as far as this consumer-led growth is concerned. Since a good number of these people are in consumer goods and services, they need not worry about any disruptor. The disruptor is going to be positive. If we are able to do something about the inability of the Philippine government to implement infrastructure projects, both those that have been budgeted, we're so disappointed that they've been underspending. And not to mention the PPPs, which in this government have been PowerPoint presentations. If the next president, whoever he or she is going to be able to address that, the disruptor will be 8 to 10% GDP growth for the next 10 years. Because we have trillions and trillions of pesos to spend on 10 airports, on railways, name it. Actually, it was enumerated by the president himself, 50 PPPs, only 9 of which have been implemented under his administration. So I can afford to be the devil's advocate because I usually am the one who sees the glass as half filled. Now I'm seeing it as half empty. So.
Okay, well that's all very interesting, but let's get back to these guys.
Yeah.
These guys are, some of them run small companies, they're bigger, some of them have bought big companies, but they're all challenging really big companies. And why is that good? What's the role of small and medium enterprises, people doing new stuff, in an economy like the Philippines? What's the role?
First of all, as far as mass housing is concerned, what is the first engine of growth? that enables us to grow at 6 to 7%. $28 billion worth of remittances from more than 10 million workers in Hong Kong. That's a big market for mass housing. Then, $18 billion worth of earnings of business process and knowledge process outsourcing. That's where all the digital businesses are benefiting. That's growing at 15% every year, whatever happens with political scenario. And let me remind people who are very focused on consumption, 40 million middle-class Filipinos discovering Coron, Siquijor, Amiga, and Gini, doing domestic tourism. That's the most positive side of tourism in the Philippines. That is going to stimulate consumption all over the country. And that will continue, whatever the political leadership is.
So what you're talking about here is the formation of the middle class.
Yes.
What I'm interested in is why somebody who's challenging a traditional house builder.
Yes.
Well, let me ask you. So there are traditional house builders who say you need to have a certain amount of money, probably quite a lot of money. You need to be from a certain class. You're kind of saying no, you don't. And you can start out earlier, you can start out younger, you can start out
And the disruption in housing
Yeah.
starts with the idea which everybody agrees with, that there is a 4 million backlog or unserved demand
Yeah.
in affordable housing. And every year, the industry can only provide 300 to 400,000 houses. This backlog is growing at least 5% a year. Therefore, the production of the industry is only good enough to square off the growth rate. And so what you need is to think outside the box, to innovate so that number one, you only have 330,000 houses a year. So how do you solve the housing backlog? You simply have to produce more houses. And how do you do that? You've got to do it fast. And so the disruptor there is to get a technology that is good enough, solid enough, so that the houses are of good quality, but at the same time, you can build it in 8 days.
Yeah.
And then you come in with disrupting housing finance. And so what everybody is doing 20% down payment, the market can afford a 2% down payment and do everything else on a cash flow. Because this market may not have savings, but they definitely have jobs. They definitely have an optimistic view of the future. Therefore, they're going to get married, they're going to get promoted, and therefore you can bank on their cash flows. And that is how you disrupt housing finance, is to look at it from the point of view for the first time of the buyer. And lastly, you disrupt the industry by insisting on a comprehensive collection platform that is not based on collection, but is based on education and credit, and that is not based on education, but is based on behavior modification.
I see. Kieran, can I ask you? I mean, disruption can have a scary aspect. I mean, some of your businesses may be putting people out of jobs. The person who answers the phone, for example, at the restaurant, no longer had anything to do. And do you see yourself as a net contributor, because do you think that person will then be moved to some other more productive job, or that you're creating more jobs, or that you're creating more wealth? Have you tried to net out the total value of your disruption?
So I think it's a very wrong thing to think that disruption will cause a lot of jobs, because anything which improves the productivity of the things which are happening in the economy will improve the economy as a whole. So in this particular example, while someone is not answering the phone, he is doing a better job somewhere else, because as the economy grows, more jobs are created. And second, there are two guys doing delivery instead. So by disrupting the channel, some restaurants don't deliver, and so they have to employ delivery personnel. And so we are always of the optimistic view that anything you do which makes any process more efficient will, in the macro view of the world, will always create more prosperity, more jobs. And so it's always, you'll always hear this diversity of views on disruption causing job loss. We've seen it across the world. Whoever is more productive is
right.
Better.
I totally say face value, and I basically agree with you, I guess. But there is still a kind of a missing thing, which is, if you look at the United States, for example, median wages have stagnated over the last 30 years, and the reasons that people give for that are, just to use the word disruptive, they've been disrupted by bringing in lots of people from, China and India, who are challenging their jobs, and they've been disrupted by technology, robots doing their jobs or computers doing their jobs. And you could argue that hasn't had a good impact on their lives. Of course, some of the goods they buy are cheaper, that's absolutely true, so they can buy stuff for cheaper, but their wages have stagnated.
So I think it's a multi-level thing, right? So at the first look, it feels that this is the first level impact, seems like that.
Yeah.
But if you see the net total of all the forces which will play from such a from any kind of innovation, whether or any kind of globalization-led efficiency gains, it will always be positively accruing. And so, for example, Singapore is a very good example of this. They are very open for foreigners coming in, bringing talented people into the country is always a good idea, because talented people create more jobs, they are more entrepreneurial. That's also what our companies are doing, which is creating businesses where business is not existing, rather than thinking of replacing existing industries and disrupting them by replacing the value that they are creating. We just create value where that doesn't exist.
Right. And Dado, is that your experience in Silicon Valley?
Well, yeah, absolutely. But I want to comment about disruption here, because I think the concept is what we're talking about. Let's just suppose, okay, I'm not saying that I'm coming back here and do a lot of that work that we do in Silicon Valley. If I were to come back here and do those things, it's just enormous opportunities to disrupt infrastructures, computing, communication, consumer, population all over the countryside. They're not sharing this technological revolution that you see in cities. That all can be disrupted. And at the same time, we can make it all very cheap. The issue I see, however, is that because our government, to a large extent, and academia did not see to it that they trained the right expertise, the growth areas in expertise, simply is very limited here. We did a project, R&D project for the government, for the Department of Education, and I led that project, and we architected a computing and communication infrastructure for the Department of Education because of their desire to, populate the schools with computers. And I claim that, having done a lot of innovation in those computers that we use, it is not the right solution for schools. So we architected and designed it, and we hired as many Filipino engineers as we can, but there were just some things that I had to go get my engineers in Silicon Valley and, all right, let's design this here because we need to do it here. So except for that, the opportunity here to disrupt so many infrastructures, technology is what I'm talking about, it is very rich in opportunities. Now, this APEC and ASEAN integration, I think we are going to be disadvantaged because other countries have so much more capability than what we have here. And then we open this up.
Okay, well, I might get back to ASEAN in a minute. I'd just like to take it back to some of the things that Professor Robinson brought up. There are extractive institutions. He gave the example of Carlos Slim, a kind of rentier capitalist who's got a monopoly. And he said or suggested that this was one of the ways in which business has been done in the Philippines over the ages. And we know that there are a number of very rich families. There's, oligopolistic element to the way the Philippine economy runs. You guys presumably are challenging those people, and presumably they don't like to be challenged, and they're trying to stop you. And could you tell us a little bit about, who are the obstacles to this, and whether you partly see what you're doing? I'm sure you're doing it because you want to make money and you want to have fun and all of that, but whether you see what you're doing as maybe beginning to shift the Philippines from an extractive to an inclusive kind of place, or is that too big a concept?
So the first answer is that from the macro point of view.
Sure.
Disruptor that is going to be very important would be first passing of the competition law, so that these people who are trying to challenge the big players
Get a
will
chance.
be able to compete more, because we are really still under the grip of a few families who control the economy.
So what is the state of the competition law at the moment?
It's about to be passed.
I see.
I just want to make sure that this Congress will give a high priority to it. And the second one, and I disagree with a statement that earlier, the foreigners don't like to own land. We must give foreigners a lot more leeway to own land, to own more than 40% equity in public utilities, to own at least some percentage in media and so on and so forth, which means we have to amend the Constitution. I think if that's not done, then we will have our economy still controlled by this elite. Because Filipino First policy, which is inspired all of these restrictions, is really, in my book, reach Filipinos first than the rest. And so I really am campaigning. Congress is fully agreed. It's only the president who doesn't want it. So let's change the president and then probably
So we're talking real disruption here. This sounds like a revolution.
just a few months ago. Just a few months ago.
And from a business perspective, does any of this resonate?
Well, for us, we've always viewed ourselves as a company that wants to distribute our products outside Philippine shores. We don't want to limit ourselves to just Filipino consumers. We want to sell to Indonesia, Thailand, and all of the other neighboring countries. We want to leverage off the skill sets of Filipino engineers to actually make products that other countries' customers will buy, rather than us being highly skilled and more affordable labor for countries to outsource their work to.
Yeah.
So, Philippines is a launch pad for us, and as we roll out our products and services overseas, we want to really say Filipino engineering talent made and created these products and services.
Right. Do any of you, do you think the Philippines is a good place to be a disruptor, or are there problems here? Would you like to see, are there laws that could be changed? Are there things that could be done that would make it easier for you to?
Yes, so on one side you have the government framework. But what I'm saying is that even in the private sector alone, you can already be a disruptor there. In fact, even as we prepare ourselves for the disruptions that are going to happen, for example, with ASEAN integration, we should also prepare ourselves to be the disruptors so that we can lead into our sector with change and innovation. I think one of the things that are against disruptors and everybody is the conventional, the safe, and the always tried and tested conventional reasoning of doing things. I think that more and more entrepreneurs, businessmen, should have the mantle given to themselves to fight for out-of-the-box solutions, so that, for example, in the housing industry, so that the backlog of housing can ultimately be solved.
Yeah. And Kieran, you operate across Asia. Do you notice any difference with the Philippines? Is it easier, more difficult to be a disruptor here, or is it pretty much the same stuff you do?
No, for us, Philippines is a very important market. We always, whatever we've launched here, we see very quick adoption, because the population is very young, they're very aspirational, they want to try out new things. In terms of internet penetration, I think the telecom companies, despite being only a few of them, have done a very good job in being very innovative in the products and services that they have. And so the penetration of the country is touching 50% on the internet, which is very good and very affordable in at least in metro areas. And so for us, whatever products and services we launch compared to say countries like Indonesia or Vietnam or even Thailand, Malaysia or Singapore, Philippines is always competing or even ahead of them in most cases. And so for us, we find doing business here, while there are challenges, and we've discussed some of those, but also we've seen some forward-looking measures. For example, recently the transport regulators have put a framework to allow peer-to-peer ride sharing, which is a very innovative concept. It just makes sense to do peer-to-peer ride sharing. And Philippines has been one of the first, or maybe the only and the first country, emerging markets at least, to have a framework to make this legal and put that on the roadmap for growth.
Right. That, if I could ask you in a sense, send two questions to you. I mean, is the Philippines a good place in which to innovate, or is it problematic? And you know, do you see a broader story here? I mean, is part of disruption and small businesses eating away at the big monopolies? Is that part of moving from this extractive to an inclusive, if you kind of buy the framework that we were told about earlier?
No, to be inclusive, we talk about opportunities in the local economy itself. But the minute you think about global markets, that would be very, very difficult for the Philippines to do that. And so,
Because it doesn't have the skill sets you're saying, yeah.
not the technology-based products and services, which are, at the end of the day, the highest value kinds of products if you ever want to disrupt things. And let's face it, that innovation generally creates significant value, especially on those very difficult to do things. Because if it is easy, there could be 20 companies right away. Everyone competing, and it does nothing but reduce the pricing structure. So when it is really hard to do, to me anyway, that is real disruption.
So what's the obstacle here? I mean, is it that you don't teach coding in school, or is it that the laws are too rigid, or why isn't there not the innovation?
Coding is coding. I mean, programming is different. Programming deals with data structures, algorithms. Coding is like a technician. So, but I hear that a lot here, which frankly disturbs me a little bit. And little kids begin to do some coding. I have a close friend who asked me if I could get a mentor on coding. He said, no, don't do that. Your kid will be forever stunted. But so there are a lot of these things that people can disrupt. Actually, I hear a lot of big data here, which to me is a misnomer because that term came from the press. What is more accurate is that these data that people talk about is unstructured, uncertain. And this comes from all of your devices, which are mobile. And so, in fact, in that, it's so tough a problem that in Silicon Valley, we stay away from the conventional processors now. We're resorting to new architectures that have always been there, and it's called data flow. I mean, for you mathematicians, you understand what that is. It's pretty much approximating the way our brain works. So these kinds of things is ready, like let's say big data, is ready for applications here, but not to disrupt other countries because it is just so hard to do.
Right.
And in this part of it, we are still architecting and designing the chips in the valley because you can't just use typical processors. It's so hard to do.
JJ, no?
I would just,
You were just nodding.
yes, I would just love this. It's making a whole lot of sense. I think our response to disruption will have to do with our capacity as a people, with our knowledge of our workers, and with the experience and maturity of our organizations to actually go to the next step towards being a disruptor ourselves.
I mean, could you argue that a lot of your disruptors don't live in the Philippines? That the people that have decided to pick up sticks and move elsewhere and send back their businesses to the Philippines, some of those are more entrepreneurial, they're more adventurous.
Yes.
Because we heard, we want to bring these people back. Do you agree with that?
Yes, in fact, some of them have started to come back home.
Right.
And a lot of them have come back home not to become employees, but also to become entrepreneurs.
Right.
Because they've saved up some capital, they think they can make a go of it. Right now, one of my suppliers used to be an electrical engineer based in Singapore, but now he runs an electrical firm.
Right.
And then he does a lot of my electrical design.
So that's quite encouraging.
Yes, and so if we can encourage more and more of entrepreneurs, then the base of employment of the country actually even grows more. To the point that maybe we don't really need to send them abroad to earn that kind of wage, they can earn it here. I think that's the experience of the BPO sector.
Yeah, okay.